I still remember the exact sound my late husband's watch made when it hit the bottom of that cardboard box. A dull, hollow knock, like something precious being dismissed without a second thought. My daughter-in-law Aubrey did it right in front of me. She didn't even look up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Ruth, and I'm 63 years old. I live alone now in the house where I raised my son, a narrow 2-story on a quiet street in Oakville, Ontario, the kind of house where the stairs creak in exactly the same spot every single morning, and the kitchen smells like coffee and old wood no matter the season. My husband, Gordon, passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the day I held his hand for the last time in the palliative ward at Joseph Brant. 11 weeks is not enough time to say everything you need to say to a person you've spent 36 years building a life with. I still haven't figured out what I would have said if I'd had more. Gordon was not a man who spent money on himself. He drove the same truck for 14 years. He bought his dress shirts at the Hudson's Bay sale every November. Always the same pale blue, always one size too large, because he said tight collars gave him headaches. But there was one thing he saved up for. One thing he wore with real pride. A Longines Heritage watch, silver with a cream dial, the kind with a date window at 3 o'clock, and a leather strap he conditioned himself twice a year. He'd bought it the year our son Elliot was born. Not Elliot, I mean. Our son was not named Elliot. I should be careful here. Our son's name is Noel. He bought it the year Noel was born, 1988, and he wore it nearly every day until the last months when his wrists got too thin to keep it from sliding. When Gordon passed, I kept the watch in the top drawer of my nightstand. I didn't know what else to do with it. Selling it felt wrong. Storing it in a box somewhere felt like burying another piece of him. So it just stayed there, next to my reading glasses and the birthday card Noel made me when he was 7. A crooked orange house with a lopsided chimney. And the words, "Hap Birthday Mommy," spelled out in green crayon. I should tell you about Noel. He's 35 now, works in project management for a construction company in Mississauga. He's a good man in many ways, patient, steady. The kind of person who fixes things without being asked. He got that from Gordon. What he also got from Gordon, and I say this with love, is a tendency to go quiet when there's conflict in the room. Gordon used to call it keeping the peace. I sometimes called it something less generous. I kept that thought mostly to myself. Noel met Aubrey Langford at a work function about 3 years ago. She was doing contract HR work for one of the firms his company partnered with. She's 31, originally from Calgary, very put together, the kind of woman who sends follow-up emails after casual conversations. The first time Noel brought her home for dinner, she complimented my roast chicken and then mentioned, twice, that she normally tried to eat clean. I smiled and said that was wonderful. She had green eyes and a firm handshake, and I thought, okay, I can work with this. I want to be fair to Aubrey. I've thought a lot about how to tell this story without making her into a cartoon villain, because the truth is more complicated than that. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't malicious in the way someone is when they actually want to hurt you. She was just, and I'm choosing this word carefully, indifferent. To me, from almost the beginning. When Noel told me they were engaged, I was genuinely happy. I cried a little on the phone, the good kind of crying. I asked if I could take them both to dinner to celebrate, and Aubrey said she'd check her schedule and get back to me. It took 11 days. That should have told me something. The wedding planning started almost immediately. Aubrey had a vision, and I use that word because she used it constantly. A very specific vision for the day. Minimalist, modern, neutral tones. The venue was a renovated heritage building in downtown Hamilton, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs. It was genuinely beautiful. I told her that, and I meant it. She asked if I wanted to be involved in any of the planning. I said I'd love to help with the florals if she wanted. Gordon's mother had been a florist, and I'd learned enough over the years to know what I was doing. Aubrey smiled and said she already had a florist, a woman named Petra recommended by her sister. Of course, I said that was fine. She asked if I had any ideas for the rehearsal dinner. I suggested a restaurant in Burlington I love. An Italian place Gordon and I used to go every anniversary, warm and a bit noisy, and the pasta is made in-house. She paused, and said she was thinking something a little more curated. They ended up booking a tasting menu place in Toronto, where the portions were the size of my thumbnail, and the whole evening cost more per person than Gordon and I spent on our entire honeymoon. I ate politely and said everything was lovely. I was not asked about the menu, the music, the seating, the vows, or the timeline. The one time I offered an opinion unprompted. I mentioned gently that the ceremony music they'd chosen felt a little cold, and maybe something warmer for when the grandparents walked in. Aubrey looked at Noel, not at me, and said the playlist had already been submitted to the venue. Noel looked at the table. I took a sip of my water. The week of the wedding, Aubrey's parents flew in from Calgary. Her father, Dennis Langford, was a retired civil engineer, loud in the good-natured way of men who've spent decades in meetings and learned to fill silence. Her mother, Janet, brought wine and hugged me the first time we met, as if we'd known each other for years. I liked them immediately. I felt obscurely grateful to them for being warm to me, which is a strange thing to feel. The day before the wedding, there was a brunch at the hotel where Aubrey's family was staying. The Langfords, Aubrey's 2 sisters and their husbands, Noel's closest friends, a few cousins. I arrived to find that the seating had already been arranged. The Langfords and Aubrey's sisters were at the main table with Noel and Aubrey. I was seated at a table closer to the entrance with Noel's cousin Warren and his wife, and some friends of the couple I'd never met. I thought there might be a mistake. I asked Noel quietly if the seating was final, and he said Aubrey had put a lot of thought into the flow of the room, and maybe it was just easier to leave it. Easier. He used that word. I went back to my table and talked to Warren's wife about her daughter's swimming lessons for 45 minutes. I want to tell you honestly, I cried in my car before I drove home that evening. Not out of anger, out of something closer to grief. I kept thinking about Gordon, about how if he'd been there, this wouldn't have happened. Not because he would have made a scene. He never would have. But because Noel would not have let it happen if his father was beside him. Gordon had a way of making Noel remember himself. I went home and I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. And I thought about the gift. I had been planning it for 2 years. From the moment I understood this engagement was serious, I started quietly making arrangements. The house I want to tell you about isn't in Oakville. It's a small, detached house in Hamilton, a 10-minute drive from where Noel worked. Gordon and I had bought it as a rental property back in 2009 during the dip, paid $187,000 for it. By last year, it was assessed at just under $520,000. We'd been renting it out, and over the years it had more than paid for itself. When Gordon died, it came to me. I always intended to give it to Noel someday. I had made a decision, some months before the wedding, to give them the Hamilton house as their wedding gift. Not a check, not a card with a dollar amount. The actual property, mortgage-free, signed over to both of them. I had already spoken to my solicitor, a woman named Catherine Mead at a firm downtown, and she had prepared the transfer documents. Everything was ready. I had it notarized and placed in a standard-sized envelope, cream-colored, sealed. On the front I wrote Noel and Aubrey in my own handwriting. I tucked it inside a small gift bag with tissue paper, nothing extravagant. It was a legal document. It didn't need a bow. I did not tell Noel in advance. I wanted it to be a moment. I wanted, and maybe this was my mistake, wanting things to be a certain way. I wanted to see his face, what I was giving them. The wedding was on a Saturday in late September. The ceremony was short and genuinely moving. I'll give Aubrey that. She was beautiful in a very simple dress, and Noel looked at her the way Gordon used to look at me in the early years, like she was the whole room. I held my bouquet and tried not to think about my husband. I mostly succeeded. The reception was in the same building, 1 floor up. Cocktail hour first, then dinner. I found my seat from the place card. I was at table 7. The Langfords were at table 2, the head table adjacent. I told myself it was fine. The room was lovely. The food was good. I drank 1 glass slowly and watched my son laugh at something Dennis said and thought, he's happy. That's what matters. Gift opening happened after dinner, before the dancing. Aubrey and Noel sat at a small table near the bar, and guests brought their envelopes and boxes up, one by one. I waited. I had the gift bag in my hand, and I was aware of my own heartbeat in a way that felt slightly ridiculous for a 63-year-old woman. When it was my turn, I walked up and set the bag on the table in front of them. I said something. I don't even remember what exactly, something like, "This is from me, from our whole family. I hope it means something to you both." Noel reached for it. Aubrey reached first. She looked at the bag. She looked at the tissue paper. She pulled the envelope out, turned it over, saw that it was a plain cream envelope with their names in my handwriting. She set it aside. She looked in the bag again as if she might have missed something. Then she looked up at Noel, and I watched something pass across her face. Not anger, not quite. More like confirmation of something she'd already believed. She said, quietly but not quietly enough, "It's just a card." She set the envelope on the growing pile of open things beside her and turned to the next guest. I stood there for a moment. I don't know how long. Warren's wife was behind me and touched my elbow gently, and I stepped aside. I found my seat, and I sat very still, and I told myself that she didn't know. She couldn't know. You couldn't look at that envelope and know. And maybe she'd open it properly later, away from the noise and the rush, and then she'd understand. But then I watched. I watched as the stack of opened gifts was moved to a side table by one of the catering staff. I watched as the evening went on. The first dance. The parent dances. I danced with Noel, and I held on a bit longer than I meant to, and he didn't seem to notice. I watched as the night began to close down. And somewhere in the last half hour, I noticed the side table was being cleared. A younger staff member in a black apron was collecting plates and stacking items. And I watched, with a very specific kind of stillness in my chest, as my cream envelope, my notarized, signed, transferred, $520,000 deed envelope, was swept off the table with a pile of torn tissue paper and dropped into the large clear bag he was collecting rubbish in. I stood up. I crossed the room in a way that I hope looked calm, because I genuinely cannot tell you what my face was doing. I reached the staff member and I said, as evenly as I could, "I'm so sorry. I think there may have been a document in with that paper. A cream-colored envelope with 2 names on the front. Could I just have a look?" He was very kind about it. He set the bag down, and together we went through it. Napkins and programs and a torn card and some ribbon. And there, folded around a piece of silver tissue paper, was my envelope. Intact, sealed, unopened. I put it in my purse. I thanked him, and I went back to my table and I poured myself the last of the wine in the carafe, and I drank it in 3 sips. I did not say anything to Noel that night. I drove home alone, and I sat again at the kitchen table, the same spot as the night before, and I put the envelope on the table in front of me, and I looked at it for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what I felt. I know the version of this story where the mother-in-law is furious and righteous, and marches back in with the deed, and causes a scene. That's the saddest version. But that wasn't what I felt. I felt tired. I felt the specific exhaustion that comes from having tried, quietly and consistently, for a long time, and realizing that it had made no difference. I thought about the brunch seating. I thought about the florals. I thought about the 11 days before she texted me back after the engagement. I thought about Noel at the table, looking down at his water glass. And I thought about Gordon's watch. The watch was still in my nightstand drawer. I'd thought about giving it to Noel someday. It felt like the right thing, a father's watch passed to a son. But that night I took it out, and I held it for a long time. And I thought about the kind of home I'd want Gordon's watch to live in. What it would mean, sitting in a drawer in that Hamilton house, in a marriage where I was at table 7. I didn't make any decision that night. I put the watch back. I put the envelope back in my purse. I went to bed. Noel called the next morning, the Sunday. The kind of call newlyweds make the morning after when they're still warm from the celebration. He sounded happy and slightly hoarse, and he said, "Thank you for being there. Mum, it meant everything to us." I said, "Of course." He said Aubrey wanted to reach out about honeymoon logistics. They were heading to Portugal in 5 days. Could he come by to grab some things he'd left in the basement before they flew out? I said, "Of course." I said I'd make lunch. He came Tuesday. He was bright and distracted in the way people are when they've just married someone they're still a little dazzled by. He went downstairs to collect his things. I made us grilled cheese and tomato soup. His request since he was about 8 years old, the same as always. And we sat at the kitchen table. After a little while I said, "I need to tell you something." He looked at me the way he's looked at me his whole life when he thinks I'm about to say something serious, a particular stillness. I put the envelope on the table between us. I said, "This was my wedding gift to you both. The Hamilton house, transferred into both your names, mortgage-free. Catherine Mead has all the paperwork. It was placed with your other gifts at the reception. It was not opened. It went into the rubbish bag with the torn paper." I took it back. He was very quiet for a moment. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He said, "Mum," I said, "I know." He picked up the envelope very carefully, the way you pick something up when you're suddenly afraid of it. He turned it over. He looked at his name and Aubrey's name written in my handwriting on the front. He put it down. "She thought it was just a card," he said. "I know," I said. "She didn't know what was inside." "I know she didn't." He was quiet again. I let him be quiet. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that it didn't matter whether she knew what was inside. What mattered was the moment of it. The looking in the bag for something more. The setting it aside. The way someone looks when they have already decided that what they've received is not enough, before they've even opened it. Noel put his elbows on the table and pressed his hands over his face and stayed like that for a while. I ate my grilled cheese. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking at something. Finally he said, "What are you going to do with it?" And I said something that surprised even me, because I hadn't fully decided until that exact moment. I said, "I'm keeping it, for now, not to punish anyone, just because I need to make sure it goes somewhere, it will be cared for." He lifted his face and looked at me, and his eyes were wet at the corners. He said, very quietly, "I'm sorry, Mum, I should have. There are things I should have done differently. I know that." I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. I said, "I know you do. And I love you. That is not in question." We didn't talk about Aubrey directly. There are some conversations that have to find their own time, and this one wasn't ready yet. He finished his soup and helped me carry his boxes to the car, and when he hugged me goodbye on the porch, it was a longer hug than usual, the kind that means something, and I held on. I've thought a lot about forgiveness in the months since. Real forgiveness, the kind that doesn't have anything to do with condoning or excusing, just choosing to release the weight of it so you can breathe properly. I'm not there yet with Aubrey. I want to be honest about that. We've had 2 family dinners since the wedding, and they were perfectly pleasant on the surface, and I smiled and I asked about Portugal, and she showed me photographs on her phone. It's not hostility. It's more like a careful distance, the kind 2 people maintain when they both understand, without saying so, that something happened. Noel and I have talked more since the wedding than we had in the 2 years prior. He calls on Sundays now, which he didn't before. It's something. Gordon's watch is still in the nightstand drawer. A few weeks ago I took it in to a shop on Lakeshore to have the strap replaced. The old one had dried out. The man behind the counter, an older Ukrainian fellow with reading glasses pushed up on his head, looked at it for a long moment and said, "Longines Heritage. Beautiful movement. You don't see this one very often." I told him it had belonged to my husband. He was quiet for a moment and then he said he would take good care of it. He did. The new strap is dark brown, slightly softer than the old one. I brought it home and I set it on the kitchen table, and I looked at it in the afternoon light, coming through the window over the sink, and I thought about what Gordon would have made of all of it. He was not a man who said much when he was thinking. He would have gone quiet. He would have gotten up and gotten himself a glass of water and stood at the sink for a minute looking at the yard. And then he would have come back and sat down and he would have said something practical and probably right. I don't know what he would have said, but I think it would have involved something about patience and something about knowing your own value, and probably something about not giving your best things to people who haven't yet shown you they'll take care of them. I'm still deciding what to do with the Hamilton house. Catherine tells me I can transfer it at any time, or I can lease it, or I can sell it. I'm in no rush. The tenants are good, and the mortgage has been paid off since 2021, and the property taxes are manageable. There's no urgency. And there's something I've come to appreciate about not rushing, about sitting with a decision until it becomes obvious, rather than forcing it before it's ready. What I know is this: I am 63 years old. I am healthy. I have a home I love and a son I love. And I have, slowly and sometimes painfully, been building a relationship with a daughter-in-law who is complicated and flawed in ways I am still learning to understand. As we all are, I have not given up on any of it. But I've also learned, finally, maybe a little late, that love is not the same as surrendering your own worth to keep the room comfortable. Gordon's watch deserves a wrist that appreciates it. The Hamilton house deserves a family who'll care for it. And I deserve to be someone's first table. I'm not in a hurry anymore. I know what I'm waiting for. And this time, I'll know it when I see it.